All right, everybody. Welcome to But What If We Win with me, Zuri Horwitz. I am a former candidate for Congress for El Paso County, Colorado in Congressional District 5. And I just wanted to say that it's really important that if Dems win, through all the gerrymandering, through everything that happens, we must have a plan for what we are going to do when we are in Congress because our country is a mess. It does not work. And we are now enacting very cruel policies that we have enacted often in the past, but in ways that are even more devastating than before. So, this episode will be about Palestine and Israel. It will be about genocide. It will still be messy like all of these. It will not be as edited and well thought out as it could be. But so hopefully you can give me some grace, but I think it's important to talk about. And then next week we will do work on tech and AI. And then after that, we'll do tax policy. So, all right. I think it's important to note that I am half Israeli. My father is Israeli. His family part of it moved to Bnei Brak in 1846, I think. And the other part of the family moved after World War One, after the Russian Revolution at the turn of that century, the 1900s. So this is obviously extremely personal to me, but at the same time, I think it's important to acknowledge that while it's deeply personal to me, I do not live in Israel, and I do not feel that I can adequately represent or say what should happen in the region. Let me get into it a little bit more. One of the things that we always got brought up with is never again. And one of the biggest things that changed me was understanding that genocide happens, that people commit genocide all the time. And the biggest moment of sadness was figuring out that Indonesia had a genocide, a mass murder of 500,000 to 1 million communists. Other estimates are 2 to 3 million communists. And I heard about this, and this is late, right when Bali was the premier paradise destination. And it just seemed like a place that was so resplendent, so fruitful. If there was one place on earth where mass murder should not have reached, it would seem to have been Bali. And understanding how ubiquitous it is and how horrifically human it is to murder other people has always made me question whether human beings are good or bad. There's also two movies, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, which really devastatingly examine those murders, made by Indonesian film crews along with a director from the US. So I think it's important that we set the stage about what has happened in Gaza. This is from Wikipedia. As of December 2025, at least 70,117 people in Gaza have been murdered. The vast majority of the victims were civilians, and around 50% were women and children. Compared to other recent global conflicts, the number of known deaths of journalists, humanitarian, and health workers and children are among the highest, which it seems like Israel is targeting aid workers, humanitarian workers, and journalists. Thousands more uncounted bodies are thought to be under the rubble of destroyed buildings. A study in the medical journal The Lancet estimated that traumatic injury deaths were undercounted by June 2024, while noting an even larger potential death toll when indirect deaths are included. And I think it's really important that we do include indirect deaths we'll get into that a little bit more. The number of injured is greater than 171,000. Gaza has the most child amputees per capita in the world. The Gaza genocide caused more than 21,000 children to be disabled. And I also think it's really important to note, in particular, that Israel has targeted hospitals, homes, schools, and mosques. These are cultural centers, beyond our human bodies and our short lives. The things that we build together, which include buildings, that's like the collective work of our communities. That's the collective accumulation of humanity. I think I went to Europe, and I went to Krakow and the Jewish Center, and one of the saddest parts was going there and having it be the trendy part of town and having, at least from what I saw, no Jewish community there. And I think that annihilation, that taking over of land where other people lived, is horrific. And I also think it's important that we quickly get into Jared Kushner wanting to develop the waterfront property in Gaza. That's psychotic. It was in an interview at Harvard on February 15th. And again, if people would focus on building up livelihoods, oh God, and then once again blaming people for what is happening for Israel murdering Gazans. Now, of course, this started out with a massacre. And, the October 7th attacks killed. Let me just make sure. Nope, I'm looking at the wrong one. Yeah, no, I'm looking at the right one. Oh, there's so many. Sorry. We are looking, and unfortunately we are not. So throughout 2023, increased settler attacks displaced hundreds of Palestinians. In April, clashes occurred around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a contested holy site in Jerusalem. There is also an Israeli at around 6:30 a.m. Let's start. I'm so sorry. I just want to get this here. No. Sorry. I'm looking. Thank you for your patience with me. So yeah, at 6:30 a.m. the same day, a massacre unfolded at an outdoor music festival that resulted in at least 360 dead and many others missing. So that's kind of the big thing of it. Yeah. And then there was, the rocket fire, killing 12 and injuring dozens of others. It's important that we acknowledge that this was an asymmetrical response from Israel to Gazans attacking, that it is not the same thing. I think it's really important that we're clear that, I'm going to get into it a little bit more. I also think it's really important that when we talk about this, we talk about what we as the United States should do. We can get stuck in, and I'm going to call out Sideburns, who's a YouTuber. He's like a philosophy major, and sometimes he'll talk about things and he'll say it's bad, but he won't get into the policy of how to make something be fixed or look at the consequences of the policy. And I think it's really important that when we talk about this, we don't just say a genocide is horrible, but also how do we, as the United States, fix this? This isn't just a thought experiment. So we need to stop aid to Israel, and it needs to be contingent on the safety and well-being of the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank. So I would say like monthly check-ins. If there's going to be any aid to Israel, then there has to be consistent check-ins ensuring that Gazans and people in the West Bank, the Palestinians, are safe. That also can include military aid to protect those people from Israel attacking. However, this is something that I think is important. And aid to Israel can be contingent or may not continue based on the actions and who is in charge of Israel. If Israel continues to attack and murder Palestinians, then they should not be receiving our aid. At the same time, I do not believe the United States should be in charge of regime change. We have attempted regime change for horrific reasons over and over and over. Just look at, us, across Latin America. Just look at us in Iran right now, saying when Iran had a mass movement against the extremely repressive current regime, and then with the US attacking, we actually re-entrenched that horrific repressive regime. So I don't think it's our choice. I also strongly believe, again, my dad is Israeli. But, in the past 20 years, I've been in Israel for maybe a total of 2.5 months. I do not know the players. I do not know the people. I also think it's really important to consider Afghanistan. We don't know places when we do not live there and have full, strong ties there, really. And I also don't believe we do have strong ties in Israel, but I don't believe it's other countries. I think that's not healthy to decide another country's government in Israel and in Palestine. That is not our place. It is our place to stop genocide. It is our place to ensure people have aid, to ensure that people are healthy, to ensure that people can rebuild. And we can make a choice of who we give our money to. But I don't believe we should determine for other people how they are supposed to live, because I think it almost inevitably backfires. Anyway, so I wanted to go into, this is going to be a little bit fuzzier. And you can tell me again, we do this all the time. The US backs regimes all the time. I do not trust us to do a good job. Maybe the only two countries, Germany and Japan, nearly 80 plus years ago, have ever had successful regime changes because of the United States. We have over and over again undermined democracy. I do not see us as building up democracy in the world. I also want to mention, because I think it's really important, sorry, and I will go find it. Thank you for your patience with me. The El Gamal family, a woman, Hayam El Gamal, and her 5 children who were in ICE detention for 10 months, who originally came from Colorado Springs. And I'm sorry that I have not done enough in support of this family. They have been released. Her husband, in June 2025, attempted to murder people who'd gathered, Zionists and Colorado protesters in Boulder. This family was here and was detained because of his actions. And we should never have collective punishment. I think it's really important to never have collective punishment. And I'm sorry that this is so stilted. Oh, God. And yeah, I'm sorry, I'm reading through this and it is horrible the way the Trump administration. So the family, who range in age from 5 to 18, they live in Colorado Springs. And after they were released, then they tried to remove them again. And yeah, the family arrived in the U.S. on tourist visas in 2022 and applied for asylum before their visas expired. And so again, that's his family. And they should not have been collectively punished for the father's. And now, and he was also her ex-husband at this point. Yeah, so back home in Colorado on Saturday, 2 days after their release, El Gamal and her children reported to an ICE office for a required check-in. Their ICE detained them again, told them they were being deported to Egypt, and rushed them onto a plane. And it was only after the lawyers rushed to 4 federal courts on Saturday to stop their deportation. So that is a story everyone is still watching, but I think it's really important. And I think the key of this is that we can't fall into collective punishment for families, and we can't get stuck into fascism. So let me talk a little bit more. Israel, I think, is what happens when the victim becomes the perpetrator. There's this idea that when you're the victim of hate, that you can never be the perpetrator. And I think part of that happened in, the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a turn to nationalism in Europe. And that meant that Jews who had lived in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years didn't have any ancestral home. And it culminated in the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were murdered. And I grew up in Skokie, Illinois. I went to a school on the Upper East Side with many, many Holocaust survivors. And I don't think we talk enough about the wounds we just think, oh, they survived the Holocaust, they're fine. But a big part of it, and a big part of Zionism, was that the victims didn't fight back, that we walked willingly into the gas chambers like sheep. And I also want to mention that this also included the Romas, who did not have a home, and that many other people. Europe had been a messy group of different people and different rulers for a long period of time, and was not naturally subdivided into so many different nations. And so in Europe, the origin of ghettos is Europe, is Italy, and having to wear marks, on your clothing or on your arm. I can't remember which one. And Jews not often being able to own land. So, they were often money lenders because that's one of the few jobs open. Some still were farmers. Everybody was struggling the whole time. I think, it's like while Jews were being mistreated in Ukraine, Ukrainians were being starved. There's never a simple history. So thank you for listening to this messy version of history. I also think prior to this, Jews would occasionally be murdered in pogroms. And although I think there was a bigger uptick during this time, but a little bit like Black oppression, this is a messy thought again, in the United States. Black oppression in the United States results in murder, results in rape, results in exploitation and degradation. But the goal is not annihilation. because the goal is to have an underclass that can permanently be exploited. So Jews, I think, often people would go after them, rulers would go after them when they needed money. But there wasn't necessarily the for sure idea that your neighbors really wanted you to be dead and not live here anymore. Like not be alive, not be in existence. And at the turn of the century, there was kind of a fight between the Bund versus Zionists. So thank you for letting me get in here messily. This is also inspired a bit by a little bit fruity podcast with Naomi Klein, and I think that's important to mention. But let's talk a little bit about what the Bund is and what what Zionism is. And so I'm going to read from this Swarthmore Phoenix article. Essential to our understanding of this crisis, this is Naomi Klein, and Zionism more broadly, is the fact that the history of Jewish politics and political resistance to anti-Semitism, while often simply reduced to the Zionist movement that ultimately prevailed, is in fact quite multifaceted. In particular, Klein highlighted another possible vision for Jews in Europe, which rejected Zionism and its tactics of violent displacement and dehumanization. This alternative idea was embodied by the Jewish Labor Bund, an organization and movement whose labor radicalism, staunch anti-Zionism, and commitment to the Jewish diaspora was central to Jewish politics in the 20th century. As the devastating and genocidal effects of Zionism on Palestinians has become only more evident over the summer, So basically, the Bund developed in tandem with and as a rejection of Zionism. It was founded as a political party and trade union in the Western Russian Empire in 1897, the same year that Theodor Herzl convened the First Zionist Congress. Zionists argued that Jews, faced with mounting hostility and anti-Semitism in Europe, needed to form their own ethnically Jewish state in Palestine. And I think, again, there's colonialism. All this is happening while Europeans go to other countries and take them over. And it was becoming very, very clear that Europe was trying to become ethnostates, and there was no place in those ethnostates for Jews. There's another version of a multicultural democracies that put union and labor and the working man first. Okay, and so let's talk about however, the Bundists saw this Zionist escapism as a submission to the prevailing anti-Semitic narratives across Europe that Jews must get out. In fact, many of Zionism's strongest proponents were quite anti-Semitic. This Bundist condemnation of Zionism was integral to the Bundist philosophy, which grounded itself in the Yiddish idea of Doikat, here-and-ness. For members of the Bund, this meant a pragmatic and unmistakably socialist embrace of existing Jewish culture, community, and diaspora, wherever it was across the world. This commitment to the diaspora was essential to their understanding of what genuine liberation and a true rejection of anti-Semitism should look like. Marek Edelman, a Bund leader during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which is interesting because that was an uprising against the Holocaust, against murder. That was, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising is often depicted very heroically to Zionists, which it should be to all of us. The Bundists did not wait for the Messiah, nor did they think about migrating to Palestine. They wanted Poland to be a country of justice, socialism, and equal rights for national minorities. So it's a brotherhood and sisterhood of men and women, rather than breaking out into our national identities. And so I want to talk about that a little bit more. In that A Bit Fruity podcast, they talk about religion being bound to nationalism. In Israel, that's Judaism and being Israeli. In the United States, that's Christian nationalists wanting to bind Christianity to being American. And what that does is it is simpler. It means let me read what I've written. And then there's no positive view of America without all of us: trans people, black people, immigrants, women, Jews, Christians. I'm not listing everybody, but we are a multinational country, and valuing each person's specific humanity above all else. When we start cutting each of us out, the options of who you can be are very narrow, and how you can succeed are very narrow, along with being very cruel, because the margin of error is tiny. If you don't play the game perfectly right and you fail, it's your fault for not being good enough. And I also think, so we need a commitment to humanity, to the complexity of living with and interacting with so many different cultures and people and histories, instead of the fundamental tension between fascism and authoritarianism, which is simple, which is straightforward, and which is cruel. And the much better but much harder commitment to democracy. The reason people like fascism is that it's easy and it's simple. You're right, they're wrong. Although you can get on the wrong side very, very easily. I always like to remind people, Hitler, or Germans murdered, I'm going to look it up. Hitler killed so many Germans. So yeah, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime systematically murdered about 13. I just want to look at Germans killed World War II. Sorry, thank you for the messiness that you're allowing me. So I want to talk about the German casualties. About 5.3 million to 4.3 million Germans died. Fascism hurts people. It's simple, it's easy. Democracy is hard. Democracy is combative, it's sneaky, it's uncomfortable. But ultimately, it brings, first off, a level value to human beings. It says each human being matters in a very well-functioning democracy. And we need to hear from them. And we can't let a majority or a spite or a past victimhood allow for murder. Versus destruction. And destruction is always easy. This is my favorite saying. Destruction, it's easy to burn down a house. It takes a village to build a home. It takes craftspeople. It takes people together to inhabit a home and have community, to build the walls, to provide electricity, to fashion the furniture, to style it, to add taste. And it's even if you say that you are doing it all yourself and you are paying for it all of those things that were created, even by you, are happening in conversation with other people generally. It's easy to have a simple enemy. It is much harder to live together. It's much harder to deal with huge systemic problems that require our rapt attention and work where even with our best attention, it could still ultimately fail. It's so much easier to just have an enemy. And I want to put a quote that I really like here that I think is really important. And it's from the Mishnah. And it says, this is the English version. I'll read. Shekol hame'avad nefesh echat miYisrael ma'ale elev hachatov haki'ilu evid olam male. V'kol hamekayam nefesh echat miYisrael ma'ale elav hachatov ka'ale kayam olam male. But I don't love this because it includes, so let me give you the, anyone who destroys a life is considered by Scripture to have destroyed an entire world, and anyone who saves a life is as if he has saved an entire world. But in the Hebrew line, it only includes Israel, and that's the key. Oh, okay, sorry, you're hearing this here. The Mishnah of Mechan Mamre based on Rambam's manuscript item. And so there's multiple versions. So this one says, לפיכך נברא אדם יחידי בעולם, ללמוד שכל המעבד נפש אחת, מעלם עליו כאילו עבד עולם מלא, וכל המקיים נפש אחת, מעלים עליו כאילו קיים עולם מלא. So basically, it does, in some versions it says Israel, in some places it says everybody. But this is the translation. Anyone who destroys a life is considered by Scripture to have destroyed an entire world. And anyone who saves a life is as if he has saved an entire world. We need to get to that baseline that every life, and that I do not include fetuses in that. I think the woman's life comes before the fetus. If she chooses to put the fetus before hers, that is her choice. But we need to be valuing all people in the messy way that they exist. And I like this way that it says it's a world. Each person is a world. A world is complicated. A world is not just pure and a lamb and easy to deal with. A world is messy and beautiful and horrible and kind. And I think that is really important to understand, that we do not have to have perfect victims. We do not have to have perfect people. We have to live with each other and value each other. And we also have to move towards nonviolence. It is far easier to commit acts of violence. It is far easier to light things on fire, to kill people, to say that people shouldn't be where they are and that we can displace them. It is far harder to have to live with our neighbors. And in Israel especially, in Palestine especially, it is a tiny, tiny piece of land. I think 2.5 hours across, 2.5 to 3.5 hours across, and 7 hours up and down. It is tiny. When Israel murders people, they are murdering their neighbors. This is not happening far away. These are not drones the way that we killed people in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have to commit to living with the difficult complexity, the imperfect, the not exactly obvious, easy moral answers to things, where these are the bad people, these are the good people. These are the bad people now, and they need to be stopped. These are the people being victimized and killed now, and they need to be supported and helped. And the answer to how we make it so that they're not two peoples in opposition to each other is if they are willing to see each other as people. And if one group is deciding to murder another group, we need to step in and protect the group that is being murdered. But the answer isn't that the victims have to be perfect, and the answer isn't that the evildoers have to be evil forever. The answer is much messier, and I don't have it for Israel and Palestine, truthfully. All I have is this next step, which is stopping aid to Israel and making sure that if there is aid to Israel, that it is very contingent on the health and safety and humanitarian protection of Palestinians so that they can rebuild their land. And they can determine the kind of government that they would like to have, along with Israelis. But I don't think it's my place to decide what that looks like. I think it's more our place to stop the murder and the destruction of people and allow for them to create something that is not that way. It's also why, again, violence is easy, murder is easy, building is hard and messy and complicated. And sometimes I don't know if we know how to not do that. Sometimes I think it's harder with we kill other people because we're scared that they will kill us, even if our fears are completely outsized and not compatible with the actual threat. You know, people, the Twin Towers went down. I'm going to see. The September 11th attacks killed about 2,996 people, but ultimately we ended up killing about 151,000 to 1 million people. So other survey-based studies covering different time spans, that was from as of June 2006, finds 461,000 total deaths, over 60% of them violent, and 655,000 total deaths. And that doesn't even include all of the people we sent in our military who now have PTSD. So and we don't, and with these deaths, we never seem to know. So with these murders. So I think, again, and one of the things that I want to be committed to, but look at what fucking Google did. They said, don't be evil, and then became evil. It's a slogan, but we can't trust the slogan to guide us. We have to trust continued investment into other people and universal health care and affordable housing and good union jobs. And all of that, to me, is a commitment to nonviolence. And a commitment to a world and what Israel, if they were going to exist. Because what's really important to understand about Israel is Jews didn't necessarily have a place to go. Half of my family was able to get into the US, but boats were turned back. And there was a lot of suspicion. And after World War II, people's neighbors had taken over their homes and their businesses. And truthfully, this is my speculation and the feel that I had. And Europe has many, many countries, so this varies country by country, and I think Denmark saved all of its Jews. But a lot of people in Europe were not okay with a genocide, but they were okay with the disappearance of their neighbors and the other from their communities. Even though when I visited the Czech Republic and went to Horovice, which is my namesake town, there was still the graveyard, the Jewish graveyard there, and it had been founded in 1300. So, 600 years wasn't enough to become anything but the other. And I think that's the tension. I think the tension is it's so much easier. So Israel, to many, seemed like the answer. I don't think it is. I think the beauty of our culture, and I think I'm really happy that Naomi Klein has talked about the Bund and talked about, international labor movements that the beauty of our culture is that we have been in so many places, that we have lived in so many places, and it's, a combination of our culture and where we've lived, and understanding that wherever we lived, we are a part of it and not. My home is in Colorado Springs. That's the place that I feel the most at home, partially because so many people in Colorado Springs are in the Army, in the military, in the Air Force, and have lived all over the world and understand that in a way that is actually quite difficult when you live in places where people haven't moved and haven't been displaced and forced to understand different cultures and been to different places. So I wish I had a more clear answer. I think, so I'll go back to it, is that we need to have human first policies and that every person has value. That doesn't mean that's simple and easy. Part of one of the beautiful things about living in a nursing home with people, and working in a nursing home with people that are at the end of their lives, is valuing each person not based on what they can give you or their abilities or anything, but kind of trying to value people inherently for being people and giving them as much love and support as we can to make their lives better, and just inherently valuing human beings, other human beings, and understanding that other human beings are complex and that our choices are complex and that often we do still hurt people. Although we, obviously in those situations we never want to. So, and I am going to obviously do a choice podcast about women's bodily autonomy. There's a lot of podcasts to come. Thank you for bearing with me. I think, again, we have to commit to the messiness, the torture of democracy, and understand that we are sometimes in direct conflict with each other, but we need to take violence out of the equation as much as we possibly can. And we need to support people and make sure that they thrive. And each person will need different things, and it is not a straight line. And that is good. And when we get into straight lines of good and evil, we know we're in not so great territory. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate you. Let me know your thoughts, your perspectives. We need to continue to make sure that the El Gamal family is supported and not collectively punished for the father's issues. Being a refugee is not easy. Leaving your country isn't easy. But we need people to be protected and safe. Anyway, thank you so much. Bye-bye. And yeah, next week we'll try to do AI, big tech, and then the week after that we'll try to do tax policy, and then we can get into choice and all kinds of things. But I really appreciate you being here while I learn and am messy. So thank you so much. Bye-bye. I want to add an addendum, which made it hard for me to read Doppelganger the first time, and I'm going to try to read it again, from Naomi Klein. I think we focus too much on the people doing bad things because they're entertaining and fun to watch, and we don't focus enough on understanding the people that are kind, that are able to navigate this complex world. And I think the reason is doing evil is very clear. Doing bad things is pretty obvious when we really hurt people. But the right way, good, is a much more moving target. And I think we really need to seek out stories of good in the world. Not good in a pure sense. Not good in a sense that someone had to be perfect. Because the juxtaposition of good and evil is what drives authoritarianism and fascism. It's that simplicity of this is good and this is bad. Bad, hurting somebody, bad. Helping somebody, what does that look like? Making choices that are healthy for ourselves and for our community, what does that look like? And I don't think it's prescriptive. I don't think it's one answer. I think it's a complex, messy process. There's also like, I'm sorry, this is getting so Jewish, but there's like a song in Passover and it's called Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. And it's like, basically like, then somebody hit a goat, but then what hit the goat? Then, I'm going to go into it. Sorry, this is more than you thought. So we'll just go read through a few short stanzas, but it's very silly. It's basically like, my father bought a goat, the cat came and ate the goat, then the dog came and bit the cat, then the stick came and beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the goat. The fire came and burned the stick, that beat the goat, that bit the cat, that ate the goat. The water came and put out the fire, that burned. And it's kind of this like weird thing of the cycle of life in a weird way. And so it's like, some of these things are life affirming. Some of these things are murder. Some of these things are both. And ultimately, God comes in and smites the angel of death who slew the slaughterer, who killed the ox, that drank the water, that put out the fire, that burned the stick, that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the goat. And I guess it kind of gets at the absurdity of life and the absurdity of what is justice. How do we, and that life contains all of these things all the time. So how do we bring more joy and love and kindness and goodness into the world? What does that look like? And how do we identify, the Bund instead of being focused on Zionism? How do we focus on solidarity and healthcare and transit and understand that some of our answers at a certain time, when cars came out, yes, there was a knowledge of induced demand, but a lot of it was just excitement over this novel new technology, and it wasn't necessarily coming from a place of greed, although some of it was. And a lot of the trains brought us robber barons. So life is always complex, and I think when we have to deal with that, when we have to look for the good, we're confronted more and more, if we're really looking for good, if we're really looking for better, we are confronted more and more with the complexity of people. If we want to go beyond sainthood, if we want to go beyond good and evil, we have to look at nuance. So instead of examining evil, which makes everything seem simple, we need to examine good and what is good and how to do good and what people are out there trying to make the world a better place and how we can try to do that in our time. Anyway, that's my more helpful vision. Thanks for your time. Bye.